Hello, you are listening to an archived worship service of First Presbyterian Church, Columbus, Mississippi. Thank you for listening.
There are a few things in this world more destructive to a family than disputes over money. Jealousy and mistrust can be tilled into a soil that we find our beginning. Those places where trust is built from our birth, where family should be the nurturing part of our life to help us find those nurturing places in the rest of life. But unfortunately for too many, something else gets tilled in that soil. And when that occurs, the poison can destroy everything. We see it in the news, we see it in our friendships, and most destructively in our family systems. In our text today, Luke gives us the story of Jesus being pulled into a family debate. A sibling, a seemingly wronged sibling, looks for resolution on a matter, and he takes it outside of the family. Jesus, tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me. Jesus, get involved here because nothing else is helping. Jesus, be the judge over this situation because I need satisfaction. Now I want you to notice a couple things right off the bat. First, like Jesus does so often, he just stops talking to an individual and turns and talks to a group. He says to him, he says to them. And second, Jesus almost entirely changes the focus of the conversation. That is, he doesn't choose a side. He doesn't get drawn into the family argument. What he does is actually more important. Jesus sees an opportunity to teach the crowd. And through the gospel, he teaches us. He does not give them an answer. He equips them with the tools to find a better answer. And much more, he allows them to see a blessing and hear a different voice. Instead of finding a technical, quick solution like just split the money 50-50, he invites them into a story that is powerful and dynamic and can speak to any part of life, not simply a dispute over inheritance. Now, often Jesus spoke about what he knew. Like I pointed out in the children's sermon, he lived in a land of farming. And so he tells a story of a farmer. A farmer had a good year, a really, really good year. The crops grew much more than he had ever expected, much more than they ever had in years previous. Beyond his wildest dreams, the crops continued to grow and bear fruit more than he could handle. The crop outpaced his capacity to store it all. And just like that, with that one simple sentence, a blessing becomes a dilemma. How would the farmer proceed with the management of abundance? How will he handle a blessing that is too much? How will this dilemma be resolved? I think it's first and foremost part of the dynamic nature of a parable that it can be used in almost any situation. It can be found truths in so many different places than just the one case that Jesus is telling the story. And I think when Jesus talks about greed here, it's not that it applies only to this rich farmer. We can find it in so many different places of life. And that's not always in places of abundance. For example, many years ago, I worked at Camp Hopewell. I was a counselor for many years, along with several others in this room. There was one week every year that I loved and dreaded. The week was called Camp Hope. It was a week of camp for children who had been abused and neglected by their primary families. Each of these children was sent to camp on the recommendation of Child Services or part of the foster care system of Mississippi. Now, I say I loved this week because no other week compared to the deepest understanding of ministry for me. We participated in the grace of God in the most intimate way possible. We saw God's love and peace at work in children that knew no other love and no other peace. But I say I dreaded it because for many of these children, they acted out of the pain that they had received and experienced in their own lives, and it taxed us as staff in every way possible, emotionally and sometimes even physically. Each child brought his or her own unique hurt. But there was one child who will always be remembered by me and several others, maybe even in this room. I'm going to call him Calvin. Calvin grew up in a world of malnourishment and in a world of intense competition. And it became obvious very quickly that he could not handle himself, especially at the table, where there was plenty of food provided at each meal, and yet he ate and he ate and he ate, stuffing his cheeks and his stomach until it became gouged out. It was all that mattered. His stomach and his brain had been programmed over many years to starvation. And in a time of plenty, he gorged himself until it made him sick. For his own good, for his own health, his food had to be regulated by his counselors. He had to be reminded constantly that there will be more. We will have dinner tonight. There will be breakfast tomorrow morning. There will be lunch after that. He needed that reminding every time he sat down at the table, every time the food was passed to him. For his own good, it had to be regulated. Our farmer friend reminds me a little of Calvin. His gut tells him to stuff his belly, not because he's impoverished, but only to seek out luxury. How will he resolve the problem of abundance? It's the same issue for Calvin and our farmer. He will listen to a starved soul and stow away the plentiful blessing. There's a wonderful writer named Edwin Friedman. He's written a book called Generation to Generation. It's a book about family systems and how they all play together. It is mandatory reading for every seminarian. He says in his book, when we consider money, we should remember that it is always about more than just money. Our spending, our savings, our general attitude toward material wealth are all invested with emotions and memories. Our attitude toward money is invested with emotion and memories. That means a complex web of memory and emotion gives voice each time we broach the subject of money. Voices that tell you to save, to spend, to give. Some voices that give more weight than others. But there are always those voices in your head each time we come to that subject. One of the voices that continuously plays in my head is one I got as a child. Many years ago, during a particularly self-absorbed part of my life, my father told me as I screamed at the TV that money doesn't grow on trees. We can't buy everything that you see in a commercial, Tom. In other words, money is scarce. A voice in my head that says, save, save, save. It is important to note in our text that it does not vilify money, nor does it condemn wealth. But what it does is much more complex, much more intensely personal. The parable reminds us that blessings do not have to lead to a dilemma. It asks us to consider listening to voices other than our own, investing God's emotion and memory into the blessing itself. Did you listen closely to the words of the text? The farmer repeats a word many, many times. What should I do? I have no place. My crops, my barns, I will build. I will say, soul, soul. He even speaks to himself in the second person. Soul, you. That's weird, right? The only voice he hears is himself. The only voice he considers as part of his decision-making is his own. There are no other relationships, there are no other voices until God gets his attention. And doesn't God always get our attention? He's like a starved child who only listens to his gut. Consume, consume, consume. He's like a selfish child watching TV, only seeing the commercials as more and more and more to put in his room. The farmer never considers the needs outside his own self-interest. He understands the blessing only as one-dimensional love of self. He's never thought of love of other, of God or neighbor. John Lennon has a great quote. A dream you dream alone is only a dream. A dream you dream with others is reality. And only listening to himself, the blessing becomes a curse. The price of shutting others out is finding himself imprisoned. His stomach is fat, but his spirit is starving. Talking only to himself has become a poor substitute to talking to God and neighbor. And building bigger barns is a poorer substitute to building a better community or world. A point driven home upon his death. Self-interest impoverished the blessed farmer. Greed destroyed generosity and cut him off from the true richness of the blessing itself. When it comes to the blessings in your life, what voices do you hear? What voices do you give weight? What memories and emotions do you invest? Are they ones of greed or ones of generosity? Are they ones of only self-interest or ones that come with care and concern of the other? Do these voices come with a fat stomach and an impoverished soul? A starving spirit? A joy that is found in using the blessing to be a blessing to others. This life does not need bigger barns or taller gates or longer walls. Those only become our soul's prison. Those tools of starvation and deception, they only sour the blessings from God and wither the soul. Is that who we're talking to? Is that all we're talking to? Jesus invites us to be the blessing in every part of life, whether it's in a family dispute or at a dinner table, or in those moments of our deep selfishness that we want to add more and more to the stacks of toys in our room. Jesus invites us in all of our blessings to be a blessing. And when we do, when that happens, when our blessing does not become a dilemma but a moment of deep joy in a community of faith, when that happens, we find ourselves rich toward God and in all areas of life. Amen.